Slay the Spire is a mix between a roguelike deck builder and a first grade math test. I've been playing Slay the Spire on and off again since its early beta in 2017. I've been kind of burned out on my actual card games recently, so I figured, wouldn't it be a fun idea to look back on one of the greatest deck building games of all time and ask the question, how does Slay the Spire hold up? Slay the Spire at its core is a deck building game similar to classics like Dominion. The goal of the game is to use a combination of attack cards, defensive cards, and skill cards to defeat enemy in turn-based combat. What makes Slay the Spire a unique experience is combining roguelike elements such as random modifiers called artifacts and events to make each game of Slay the Spire a unique experience. A run is very straightforward. Get to the end of the floor through a series of fights, random events, rest stops, and shops. At the end of every fight, you get a random choice of cards to pick from to add to your deck. Then, at the end of the floor, you fight a big boss. Do this for 3 stages and you win a run. There's also 3 special keys you can get throughout a run to fight a secret boss for more points and a bigger challenge. During the game, you're given a choice of what path to go down to get to the final boss. Typically, due to how risky fights can be, it's usually best to try and stick to events, most of which are favorable and controllable. But events don't always give you cards, which are the key to building your deck. This creates an inherent feeling of risk and reward when planning a run through each floor of the Spire. Is a safer route gonna be best, just to live to the next boss? Or does the player need to risk it to make a competent strategy to beat the boss? Mixed in with regular enemies, we have elites. Elites are the bigger, badder, and much harder to handle fights. Elites are a mixed bag in this game, mostly because some hard counter particular builds, or it can be unevenly balanced. For example, Gremlin Knob hurts skill-based builds, Gulag Ovalin hurts attack-based builds. Getting slapped around can end a run very quickly, but they do grant a relic modifier, which can be game-winning in a run. It's an interesting risk-reward system that definitely benefits some characters more than others. Speaking of which, the game is divided into 4 different characters, each with their own unique card pools, artifacts, and mechanics. The first of these characters is called the Ironclad. The Ironclad focuses on being a generalist, simple yet strong effects that focused on the simpler mechanics in the game. His 3 main strategies are attack stacking, defense stacking, and paying life. The strongest and most consistent of these strategies is the defensive strategies. It works by using the insane number of block gain cards the character has, and combining it with power cards like Barricade to never lose defense and never die. The player can then either slowly chip away at an enemy's health, or find a quicker payoff. The much more fun build for the Ironclad is strength stacking builds, all about getting maximum value off additional strength, either with cards that multi-attack or cards like Heavy Blade, which just get extra value from strength. I like seeing large numbers, so this build gets my Vanguard brain going. Overall, I like the Ironclad a lot as an introduction character. If he was a bit harder to play, or had some more interesting mechanics, I would play him more. But as he is, he's a bit boring, although for a player who's never played a card game before, that's exactly what they should play to get used to the mechanics. My favorite character in Slay the Spire has always been the Silent. The Silent focuses on combos and has the strongest endgame of the characters, but one of the weakest early games. The Silent has 3 main lines of support for decks. Shivs, which can do this. Poison, which is all about and last, we have discard loops. The Silent plays in the combo with the discard synergy, being able to loop cards in hand to get value. The discard core has a lot of cards that have 0 cost, letting it play a ridiculous number of cards in one turn. It also has ways to get extra draws, and then get free energy with Card Tactician. Back near the beta, my favorite thing to do with the Silent was to play discard loop and try to go for a deck built around going infinite. It just gets my Yu-Gi-Oh brain stimulated. That is until you get to the time boss, who just limits you to 12 cards per turn. Then it's pain. Despite discard being insane, my favorite part about the Silent is the Shiv mechanic. Shiv cards work by playing some sort of skill card that generates a Shiv. These 0 cost balls of hate are amazing enablers for cards like Thousand Cuts and Afterimage, which deal damage and gain block respectively for every card played. Of course, Shiv's big win con is to get an artifact that gains attack or dexterity for a certain number of attacks played. A lucky run with these artifacts can be a straight run to the final boss of the heart. Poison is a weird mechanic for the Silent. On one hand, it's consistent massive damage, but on the other hand, it can be a bit boring to play. Poison will deal a set amount of damage at the end of every turn, and you could stack it to deal more damage. As fun as it is to use the card Catalyst to multiply someone's poison, the deck does feel a bit too straightforward and unsynergistic with the other strategies to really be the most fun build. I've gone to Ascension level 20 on the Silent before the rework of Ascension, and I've gone to level 18 on my new playthrough. The Silent very quickly becomes one of the harder characters to play with on the higher difficulties due to his already weak early game. Trying to string combos together with whatever cards you do pull from a run is super fun, even if the synergies aren't as strong as they would be in a pure build. Also, the Silent tends to get a lot of its strength from artifacts, so a player can build around one strategy just to end up with artifacts supporting another. It does keep the game interesting, but it leads to a massive disparity between runs, and it does lead to some frustration when you just lose to luck at higher Ascension levels. At higher difficulties, it's not as fun to play as someone like the wacky Defect. Our third character is the Defect. The Defect is all about manipulating his unique mechanic of orbs. Orbs come in a variety of effects. Lightning orbs passively do damage, ice orb gains block, dark orbs charge up for massive damage, and energy orbs give extra energy. All these orbs can be invoked for a burst effect that uses them immediately with added ability. These orbs have the unique effect of making the Defect's early game ridiculously easy. The Defect's main playstyles are powers, which sets up a massive wall of generic buffs and abilities to just overwhelm your opponent into submission. There's also the various orb-related decks that set up trying to spam one type of orb and then trigger all of them at once. My favorite is Lightning Spam, which is definitely not just because it makes me feel like Palpatine. Lastly, there's the playstyle of zero-cost cards. Basically, there's two cards that get value for cards that cost zero. Scrape, which adds zero-cost cards off the top deck to hand, and there's All for One, which adds every zero-cost card from drop back to hand. There's something about spamming a bunch of weak attacks that feels familiar, although I can't quite put my finger on it. All of these strategies for the Defect are fun, but within a run there's one big problem, and that's actually seeing a payoff. The biggest cards for each strategy are mostly locked in the rare, so it's never a guarantee that they will be seen in a run. Not seeing a payoff leaves a player to lose the run and an unfun mess, or to adapt on the fly and create hybrids to the strategies. While the Silent or Ironclad have some very consistent strategies, the Defect can creatively force in a strategy. The more coherent, off-the-cuff combination of effects is a lot more put together than the Silent and makes for an all-around more fun experience at higher difficulty levels. With the variety of flexible payoffs, a good player can clutch out a victory in a close run. The orb mechanic rewards passive playstyles in a much more fun way than playing block on the Ironclad. Orbs also open up a lot more choices when deck building. The last character in Slay the Spire is the Watcher. Her mechanic is forms and changing between them. She has a lot of cards with the unique gimmick of having them stay in hand at the end of turn. The Watcher, in my opinion, feels quite a bit stronger than the middle characters, having easy payoffs and a strong early game. For example, the Anger Stances lets a player deal double damage at the cost of taking double damage. With a bit of thinking ahead, this is really easy to abuse. Her main strategies are a lot harder to find, but there are three main subgenres of cards that stick out. First is Scrying, where you check the top cards of the deck and can move them to the top or discard. This strategy is nuts due to its very efficient cards and a power card which grants a very easy payoff for a ridiculous amount of guard. Second is the Divine playstyle. This is all about stacking 10 mantra to reach the Divine stage. In the Divine stage you get 3 free energy and do triple damage. This is a neat win con for builds, but I personally don't like it as its own playstyle. Lastly, the best build of the Watcher is one about swapping forms quickly, getting value off cards like Flurry of Blows for value. The strategy is a bit less defined and more so a general type build, but I wouldn't sleep on it. Watcher also has a ton of cards that get value outside of matches, like Wish or Lesson Learned. These really emphasize the planning ahead strategy, and that's super interesting, even if it is a bit overpowered at times. The Watcher feels like a bit of a tacked on character to the game. She's a super welcome addition and fun to play, but it's not hard to notice the game had this theme of 3s that were color-coded to the other characters, leaving the Watcher to feel just a little left out. Overall, the Watcher's not my favorite character, but a welcome, different playstyle to the other 3 characters. So where does that leave the game as a whole? Well, it's still the same super fun, streamlined pick-up-and-play deck building experience it has always been. The focus on mechanics like deck cycling always excite me. Of course, someone's always going to have a positive opinion on this game due to how diverse each playstyle is. I like combo decks, so I can always go and play the Silent instead of the Ironclad, who I don't quite vibe with as much. This means the game is one of the best recommendations I can give to someone trying to get into card games. Slay the Spire is still immensely replayable with its Ascension difficulty system, where each successive run adds stacking negative modifiers. My only complaint about Ascension is how uneven the difficulty spikes can be. Ascension 17 and 19 are all super punishing, while Ascension 11 and 13 don't really add a lot to the difficulty. It's definitely a challenge as you work up there, but be ready for some difficulty spikes. If Ascension mode isn't for you, and if you still want a unique experience, you can either play the hell that is in this mode, or you can do the Daily Climb. The Daily Climb is a run with a unique set of modifiers, and a unique deck that you can play for score. It also changes every day, so there's always variety. Sometimes Daily Climb can be a bit easier, but it's very fun to try and optimize the score for events. If you're wondering about Endless mode, that's very fair, because it's hidden in the section for custom games. If you go through the list of modifiers, you'll see an option for Endless. Basically, runs now loop back to the start start, but enemies will start to do more and more damage, as well as have bigger and bigger effects. Every boss chest now gives negative relics after a certain point. This mode gets insane. At a certain point it becomes practically impossible to guard attacks, and your entire deck will become status cards blocking you from having a deck. Coming up with these solutions to these problems is pretty hard, even if considering how everything in the game will be available to you after a certain point. I honestly don't recommend endless mode. This is mostly because for me, the most fun parts of a run are initially putting a deck together. And more so, after a certain point of difficulty, only a few strategies really become viable, and I'm not about that. Good news, Slay the Spire is extremely moddable. I'd recommend the mod Downfall, which lets you play as the bosses from the game. There's honestly more content in the mod than in the game, but you didn't hear that from me. If this video does well enough, I'll cover that mod in the future. Overall, I have to give Slay the Spire a very high rating of like, let's say 95 to 98 out of 100, because it's such a good execution of its genre. In fact, Slay the Spire would go on to inspire a whole subgenre of deck building games, which, while not all of them bad, most don't capture the simplicity and flexibility of Slay the Spire's system, making them a bit weaker overall, but really strong niche. Thanks for watching. I might have 1 or 2 more game reviews coming up, but my priority for the foreseeable future is to finish up the Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier List series. I'll rank every deck in the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. Hopefully we'll move on to some other content, but that is if I don't have a mental breakdown first. I have a fully produced video that's in the works about what it's like to try to get into competitive Warhammer 40k, and without saying much, it's been an experience. I'll see you guys next time.